Earlier, I spoke with Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi. He's the ranking member of the House Select Committee on U.S. competition with China. Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Now, Blinken's visit to China, the first by U.S. Secretary of State since 2018, the first major re-engagement between these two countries since the Chinese spy balloon saga in February. What are you expecting to see out of this trip?
Well, I'm really glad it's happening. I commend the Biden administration for being persistent in making sure this trip occurs. But as you know, this is going to be not an end, but a means to an end. And I'm hopeful that it leads to more dialogue, more engagement, and kind of stabilizing the relationship.
Taiwan likely to be on the agenda. We've seen several close calls in the Taiwan Strait. Between the two countries, recently a Chinese warship crossed in front of a U.S. destroyer. What should Blinken be doing to try to reduce tensions between the U.S. and China?
I think for some reason, the CCP believes that maybe not having military-to-military dialogue and having these dangerous maneuvers in international airspace or international waters will somehow lead to us not exercising our freedom of navigation, or for that matter, all the different nations in that neighborhood. But I think that what they do is they basically create an image of bullying. And as you know, nobody responds well to bullying. And there will, instead of being de-escalation of the situation, perhaps pressure to escalate. And so I think Secretary Blinken, I hope, will convey to them that this type of aggressive maneuvering, this type of aggression really is counterproductive for everyone in the neighborhood. So I would hope that he explains, and I trust that he will, that they understand that we will continue with our transits, that the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea and other international waters will continue to be areas where different nations exercise their freedom of navigation. And finally, we should have military-to-military dialogue. That is very crucial.
Now, Blinken said on Friday that he'd be raising the issue of illicit drugs in China. I know that you've been outspoken about fentanyl. A group of Republicans have proposed that there could be Chinese sanctions to stem the flow of fentanyl from the country. Is that something that you would support?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at them more closely. But what we know is that the People's Republic of China is the source of the vast majority of the precursor chemicals that go into the fentanyl that is pressed and made into pills in Mexico. And I think a lot of people on Capitol Hill are scratching their head, wondering how the CCP would not be aware of the production and the supply chain that leads to fentanyl in America.
We've also heard reports in U.S. media that China denies that the country is setting up a spying operation in Cuba. It took days for the U.S. to shoot down a suspected Chinese spy balloon that floated over the country. Do you think that the White House is being tough enough on China's surveillance program?
Well, I think that as the White House, I believe, said the other day, and it's public information, there's long been such operations from Cuba, not something that we want to celebrate, but what we have to take countermeasures with regard to and to protect ourselves. I think here's the bottom line, which is we know that the CCP operates satellites, operates other means of reconnaissance, and other nations do the same. That does not necessarily mean that our relationship needs to become worse than it is right now.
Just to hop in, because just to emphasize, this suspected spying operation in Cuba, that would be about 100 miles from the shores of the United States.
Sure, but I think that what the White House said the other day is that this has long been present in Cuba. Not that we should be celebrating it, but we need to take countermeasures with regard to it. I think at this point, we have to stabilize the relationship, set a floor for the relationship, and have dialogue.
Expectations seem to have been set fairly low for this trip by Blinken. In your mind, what would be a success?
Honestly, I think that it would be successful if there's not a spy balloon that goes transit during this trip.
That seems to be a fairly low bar to clear.
I think in addition to that, hopefully we'll have more dialogue. Honestly, Carl, I think at this point we need to have more engagement, and we need to have the opportunity to disabuse, for instance, notions in China that we are out to suppress them, repress them, prevent them from rising, attaining their potential. That is not what folks like myself or my committee members or anyone else wants. We want a relationship where we can engage, but with guardrails, where we can preserve our values and interests and those of our partners and friends as well.
I do want to be sure to ask you now, Blinken has called China's systemic detention of Uyghurs in the country a genocide and crimes against humanity. What can the U.S. do for the people of Western China?
Well, first of all, he's correct about that. And your viewers may know this, but upwards of 2 million Uyghur people are in concentration camps right now as we speak in Xinjiang province. I think that we have to do, what we have to do in America is better enforce the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which basically tries to remove goods that are produced by Uyghur slave labor from our supply chains. And we're going to urge the UK, as well as our friends and allies around the world, to enact similar measures, because we have to end this genocide.
Congressman, you're the ranking member on the House Select Committee on U.S. Competition with China. It's one of the rare committees in D.C. where you see bipartisan cooperation. What can we expect from your committee going forward this year?
Well, I think two things. The legislation creating the committee said that we have to assess the economic, technological, and security/military challenges posed by the CCP. And then on top of that, we have to propose ways to deal with it. So we're kind of simultaneously doing both. We've had multiple public hearings. We need to be humble and yet serious and act in a bipartisan way to deal with a very, very challenging situation, to say the least.
Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, Carl.